Hello, this is Battlerite. Battlerite is a mobile-like game that places heavy emphasis on timing and knowledge of your opponent. At least that's what I can say to best describe it in one sentence. Unlike your traditional MOBA, matches end quickly and rely more on skill than choosing the right hero. If you want to know what it's like, I suggest you try it out for yourself, free on Steam. The real question is, does the Steam controller work for Battlerite? Let's look at 3 possible bindings we can use for this game. To keep things interesting, I'm going to save my favorite binding for last. So first we're going to look at gyro mouse aiming. This is what I give this, the name I give to this binding, and is basically what you use for your first person shooters. It features the gyroscope functioning as mouse input, with vertical rotation moving the mouse up and down and horizontal rotation moving the mouse left and right. The gyroscope is enabled by touching the right trackpad. You can also move the mouse with the right trackpad. Abilities are activated using the trigger, shoulder, and grip buttons. Since Steam Controller makes use of the dual trigger, we combine 2 actions to 1 trigger. So a soft pull on the right or left trigger will activate ability 1 or 2 respectively, and a hard pull will activate ability 5 or 6. Make sure the trigger mode is set to hip fire for this. Shoulder buttons activate 3 and 4, and the left grip activates your ultimate. There's enough room here to bind every ability plus the EX modifier on either the grip, shoulder, or back buttons. Basically, doing that means that you don't have to take your thumb off the controller in order to press the face buttons. That is not good. So how does it feel? Well, from experience, I can say that this binding set feels familiar, especially if you're used to using the gyroscope for aiming in first-person shooters. But it's somewhat inefficient in that it's easy to lose track of the mouse. Using the gyroscope like this is much more suited for aiming a gun than it is for aiming the mouse cursor on screen. And while I personally don't think this is the best build, I can see how some players can really get behind this binding set, because it is very familiar and very easy to get used to. But I decided to try something else, and I decided to call this mouse region aiming. So this binding basically features mouse region, which basically treats the trackpad as a touchscreen. Where you press on the touchpad correlates to where the mouse will appear on the screen. So if you touch the right of the pad, the mouse will instantly jump to the right of the screen, and so on and so forth for the left, up, and down side of the pad. You can bind the abilities to the same spot we had them bind in the previous one, so things don't really change that much. So how does it feel? I can say that it feels less familiar, but it's also more intuitive. For top-down games like this game, mouse region is actually a good fit. The one-to-one relationship between where your thumb is and where the mouse cursor shows up makes keeping track of the mouse much easier in this method than in the previous method. So I'm not getting lost and wondering where the heck is my mouse pointing at. But there is a downside. It's a little less accurate than I would like it to be, and it can be jittery at times. Unless you have a really good thumb, it's the type of thing that you aren't gonna be that great at. Maybe if you do a lot of practice, you can be good at it, but that's going to be a lot of practice. So I basically stopped there and was about to submit this video when all of a sudden one morning I woke up and it hit me. And I call it gyro region aiming. So what is gyro region aiming? It's basically using mouse region but with the gyroscope instead of the trackpad. It frees up your right thumb so that you can bind abilities to A, B, X, or Y button instead, which is much easier for the brain to process. And I'll explain a little bit later why it frees up those buttons. But basically, I set my ability 3 to A, since most heroes' ability 3 is a evasive move or a jump move, and A is traditionally the jump button. I set ability 4 to B since number 4 for most heroes is counter, and B is commonly used as a counter button in many video games. And ability 7 is set to Y, which basically works out as many games also find their ultimate ability to Y. So already with those 3 buttons, things are pretty familiar there. But why don't I have a gyro enable button? Or why isn't that even an option? Well, the gyroscope senses orientation instead of rotation in this mode. As you may know from experience or from looking at my previous videos, if you use the mouse aiming with the gyroscope, basically the way you rotate the controller dictates where the mouse goes. If you rotate to the left, it moves left. If you rotate to the right, it moves right. Same for if you rotate it up or down. But when you use gyro region aiming, the scheme is a little different here. Basically, how you hold and orient the controller determines where the mouse is. So if you hold it upright, it's in the center. But if you lean it or steer it to the right, the mouse will move to the right. And if you steer it to the left, the mouse will move to the left. If you pull up, the mouse will move up, and if you pull down, the mouse will move down. So it feels a little bit more like you're flying an airplane than it does you're rotating or pointing a mouse pointer. It's basically a one-to-one gamepad orientation to mouse location, because no matter where I'm pointing the controller or rotating the controller, as long as I'm orienting it the right way, the mouse will stay in the same spot. This basically means it's possible to keep track of where the mouse is without even tracking the mouse on screen or looking at your fingers on a gamepad. So how does it feel? This binding has some elements of both the previous methods, and as a result, it can be considered the best of both worlds. When I first tried it, it felt terrible. It just felt awkward, like the worst thing in the world. I thought I was going to throw the controller on the ground and smash it to pieces, but I stuck with it. And it actually turned out to work really well. See, you have to intentionally get used to it, because it's based on orientation instead of rotation. It's not like anything that even I have used before, and I've been using the Steam controller for almost a year. Getting used to this scheme requires you to intentionally practice sweeping the mouse from one target on screen to the other until you get used to steering the controller instead of turning it. I suggest going to training mode for half an hour, maybe more. But don't get frustrated. The first couple of minutes will feel like a waste of time, but because it's a one-to-one orientation to mouse location, it's possible to acquire the sort of mouse memory that pro gamers get when they know exactly how far to move the mouse to snap over to a target and can make mouse movements without even thinking. This means that although this has a steep learning curve, it's possible to go further in skill with this method of mouse input than with any other method on the Steam controller, at least for this game. I also love the fact that I combine A, B, X, and Y of the buttons for the abilities with this scheme. It makes it a lot easier for me to reach the buttons. It makes it a lot easier for me to process the buttons. I spend less time thinking, where was that button bounded again? And more time just pressing B to block and A to jump, because that is simply put what you do in this game. So, back to the question at hand. Does the Steam controller work for Battlerite? I have to be honest, I was really close to saying no on this one and was about to deal my final verdict when I discovered I could use gyroscope for mouse region. I think just like with using the gyro mouse for first-person shooters, this concept of input is so far removed from what we're used to, you're going to have to get patient while you learn. But I also believe that if you're patient, you will reap the benefits with this method. Just make sure you spend some time in training mode before you go off and stake your rank on it. Did you find this video helpful? Please leave a like so others can find this video. Share it with your friends you think might benefit from it. And leave a comment with feedback or questions for me to read, and I'll try to reply. Anyway, this is Rhythm Man signing out.